Before we witness the moment when Senator Josh Hawley learned that mocking someone's education requires having your own academic credentials in order, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to see demonstrates why intellectual elitism becomes self-destruction when your own academic record is built on privilege and deception. The Senate Judiciary Committee, hearing on judicial qualifications, had been proceeding for nearly 2 hours with Senator Josh Hawley in his element, using his Yale Law School pedigree like a weapon against anyone he deemed intellectually inferior. When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett appeared as an expert witness to question the qualifications of several conservative judicial nominees, Hawley saw an opportunity to assert his intellectual dominance and score political points with his base. He leaned back in his chair with that particular smirk that had become his trademark, the one that suggested he was about to intellectually demolish someone he considered beneath him. "Congresswoman Crockett," Hawley began, his voice carrying that distinctive tone of Ivy League condescension that he had perfected during his time at Stanford and Yale. "I find it rather amusing that someone with a law degree from the University of Houston Public Law Center thinks she can evaluate judicial excellence. Perhaps those of us who attended actual elite institutions, real centers of legal scholarship like Stanford and Yale, should handle questions of constitutional interpretation and judicial fitness. I mean, Houston? Was that even ranked in the top 100 law schools when you attended? Maybe you should leave these complex legal matters to those of us with proper legal pedigrees, those of us who studied under federal judges rather than, what do they call them at state schools? Practitioners?" The hearing room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Several Republican senators chuckled nervously, while Democrats looked appalled at the blatant educational elitism. Hawley's smirk widened as he continued, clearly enjoying what he believed was a brilliant dismantling of Crockett's credibility. He adjusted his tie, a subtle gesture meant to emphasize his superiority, and waited for what he expected would be a flustered response from someone he had just publicly humiliated based on where she had earned her degree. That smirk would vanish entirely when Crockett slowly opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder that had been prepared specifically for this moment. The folder was labeled in bold letters that the cameras could clearly see. Hawley, academic fraud. She placed it on the table with deliberate calm, the sound it made in the quiet chamber seeming to echo. She didn't rush, didn't show anger, didn't match his condescending tone. Instead, she opened the folder with the methodical precision of someone about to perform surgery on a reputation that had been built on lies. Senator Hawley Crockett responded, her voice steady and professional, carrying none of the emotion that such a personal attack might have provoked. "Since you've brought up legal education and the importance of where one earned their degree, I think this committee and the American people should know the truth about your actual academic record. Not the carefully crafted biography you've been promoting for years, but the real one. The one that includes the fact that you didn't actually write the Yale Law Review article that launched your career. The one that shows you plagiarized substantial portions of your Stanford thesis. The one that reveals you've been lying about your class rank for 20 years. And most importantly, the one that proves you've been using fraudulent academic credentials to question the qualifications of others, while hiding your own academic misconduct." The transformation of Hawley's face was captured in excruciating detail by every camera in the room. The confident smirk crumbled into confusion, then shock, then barely controlled panic. His hand reached for his water glass but knocked it over instead, the spill spreading across the table as he scrambled for napkins, his composed facade completely shattered. The committee room that had moments before echoed with nervous laughter at Crockett's expense was now completely silent, except for the sound of Hawley's labored breathing picked up by his microphone. The story of how Jasmine Crockett came to possess this devastating information about Josh Hawley's academic fraud began months before this hearing. Her team had anticipated that appearing before the Judiciary Committee would make her a target for educational elitism, particularly from senators like Hawley, who frequently used their Ivy League credentials to dismiss opposition. What started as routine opposition research had uncovered something extraordinary. Working with a network of academic integrity advocates, former classmates who had grown tired of Hawley's sanctimony, and most importantly, a whistleblower from Yale Law School's administrative office who had access to records that should have been sealed. Crockett's team had discovered that Hawley's entire academic career was built on a foundation of deception, privilege, and outright fraud. Josh Hawley had cultivated an image as the intellectual conservative, the thinking man's populist who could bridge the gap between elite education and common values. His biography prominently featured his graduation from Stanford University and Yale Law School, his clerkship with Chief Justice John Roberts, his position as a constitutional law professor, and his published scholarship on religious liberty and constitutional originalism. He wielded these credentials like weapons in political combat, frequently dismissing opponents as intellectually inferior, while positioning himself as the rare politician with both the academic training and the common touch necessary to interpret the Constitution properly. What virtually no one knew was that Hawley's academic achievements were largely fictional, a carefully maintained illusion that had never been properly scrutinized because of the assumption that prestigious institutions like Stanford and Yale had already done the vetting. The truth was far more complicated and damaging. Hawley's admission to Stanford had been secured not through academic merit, but through his father's connections as a banker, with significant ties to the university's development office. His success at Yale Law School had been achieved not through brilliant scholarship, but through a combination of ghost-written papers, plagiarized work, and the kind of grade inflation that comes from professors who know which students are politically connected. The investigation had revealed that Hawley's famous Yale Law Review article on religious liberty, the publication that had launched his legal career and secured his clerkship with the Supreme Court, had been written entirely by another student. Thomas Chen, a brilliant but financially struggling classmate, had been paid $5,000 to ghostwrite the article, while Hawley focused on networking with Federalist Society members and building political connections. Chen had kept all the drafts, the email exchanges, and even recordings of conversations where Hawley explicitly discussed the arrangement, evidence that had remained hidden for years, until Chen, disgusted by Hawley's sanctimonious political posturing, decided to come forward. Even more damaging was the discovery that Hawley had been running what amounted to an academic fraud ring during his time at Yale. He had organized a system where wealthy students could purchase essays, case briefs, and even exam answers from struggling students who needed money. Hawley took a commission from every transaction, essentially operating as a broker for academic dishonesty while maintaining his own grades through the same system. The investigation had identified at least 17 students who had participated in this scheme, with payments totaling over $80,000, flowing through accounts Hawley controlled. As Crockett began her methodical destruction of Hawley's academic credentials, she pulled out the first document from her folder and displayed it on the committee room's screens for everyone to see clearly. The document was a certified transcript from Stanford University, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that had taken months to process. "This is Senator Hawley's actual undergraduate transcript from Stanford," she began, her tone remaining professionally neutral despite the devastating nature of what she was revealing. Despite his claims of graduating Phi Beta Kappa with highest honors, his actual GPA was 3.1, barely above average for Stanford. He was never inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, never received any academic honors, and his senior thesis, which he has claimed won the university's prize for best thesis in political science, was actually flagged for extensive plagiarism. She pulled out another document, this one appearing to be an internal Stanford investigation report that had never been made public. This is the plagiarism investigation file from Stanford's Academic Integrity Office. It shows that over 40% of Hawley's senior thesis was copied directly from other sources without attribution. The investigation was dropped not because the allegations were unfounded, but because Hawley's father made a substantial donation to the university's new political science building. The donation amount was $500,000, made exactly 1 week after the plagiarism investigation was suspended. Hawley attempted to interject, his voice cracking noticeably as he struggled to maintain composure. "These are fabricated documents," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced of his own words. "This is a smear campaign using false evidence to discredit me." "False evidence?" Crockett responded calmly, pulling out another set of documents. "Then perhaps you can explain this, Senator Hawley. This is an affidavit from Professor James Morrison, your thesis advisor at Stanford. He states, and I quote, "Joshua Hawley submitted work that I knew contained plagiarized material. I was pressured by the administration to approve the thesis despite my objections. I have carried the guilt of this academic fraud for 20 years, and am now willing to testify under oath about what occurred." The committee room was in complete chaos. Republican senators who had been Hawley's allies were visibly distancing themselves, some actually moving their chairs away from him. Democratic senators were barely containing their satisfaction at seeing Hawley's intellectual pretensions destroyed. The gallery was buzzing with whispered conversations as reporters frantically typed on their phones, sending updates to their newsrooms about the unfolding scandal. But Crockett was just getting started. She pulled out a new set of documents, these bearing the Yale Law School seal. "Now let's discuss your time at Yale Law School, Senator Hawley. Your famous law review article on religious liberty, the one you've cited hundreds of times as evidence of your constitutional expertise. The one that secured your Supreme Court clerkship." She held up a document for the cameras to see clearly. "This is an affidavit from Thomas Chen, your classmate at Yale. He testifies that he wrote that entire article for you in exchange for $5,000. He has provided the original drafts, the email exchanges where you discuss the arrangement, and even bank records showing the payment." She displayed an email exchange on the screen where Hawley had written to Chen, "Make it brilliant enough to get me a federal clerkship. And there's a bonus in it for you. Make sure to include enough originalist theory to appeal to conservative judges." Chen's response included an attachment labeled First Draft, Hawley, Religious Liberty article. The metadata on the document showed it was created by Chen and never modified by Hawley before submission to the law review. The evidence continued to mount as Crockett revealed more about Hawley's academic fraud ring at Yale. She produced spreadsheets showing payments, testimonies from students who had participated, and even a price list that Hawley had created for different types of academic work. Constitutional law exam answers cost $3,000. Law review notes were $5,000. Moot court briefs were $2,000. The system was sophisticated, organized, and had generated significant income for Hawley while he was supposedly focusing on his legal education. "This is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence," Crockett said, pulling out a document marked with the Yale Law School's Office of Student Affairs seal. "This is a confidential report from Yale's Academic Integrity Committee. They investigated Senator Hawley for running what they called an essay mill, where wealthy students could purchase academic work from struggling students. The investigation found clear evidence of the scheme, but was terminated when Hawley threatened to expose similar practices by other politically connected students. Yale chose to protect its reputation rather than pursue justice, but they kept the records." She then revealed something that transformed the scandal from academic fraud to potential criminal liability. These bank records show that Senator Hawley has been using his fraudulent academic credentials to obtain positions and compensation under false pretenses. His position as a constitutional law professor at the University of Missouri was obtained using the ghost-written article as his primary qualification. His salary there was over $200,000 per year for 6 years. That's $1.2 million obtained through fraud. His various board positions, speaking fees, and book advances, all secured using his false academic credentials. Total, over $5 million. This isn't just academic dishonesty, Senator. This is criminal fraud. Hawley's attempts at defense were becoming increasingly desperate. He turned to his attorney, who was sitting behind him, whispering frantically. But Crockett continued her methodical presentation of evidence, each new revelation adding another layer to the pattern of deception that had defined Hawley's entire career. She pulled out records showing that Hawley had failed the Missouri bar exam twice before finally passing on his third attempt, a fact he had hidden by claiming he had chosen to take the bar exam in Missouri rather than in D.C. where he had clerked. She revealed that his Supreme Court clerkship application had contained false information about his class rank and academic achievements, potentially invalidating his appointment. "But here's what makes this particularly relevant to today's hearing," Crockett said, bringing the focus back to the present situation. "Senator, Hawley has spent years using his fraudulent academic credentials to question the qualifications of judicial nominees, to dismiss the opinions of those he deems intellectually inferior, and to position himself as an authority on constitutional law. Just moments ago, he mocked my education from the University of Houston. So let me be clear about my actual academic record. She pulled out her own transcripts and credentials, displaying them on the screen with quiet pride. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Houston Law Center with a 3.96 GPA. I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review, where I actually wrote my own articles. I passed the Texas bar exam on my first attempt with a score in the 96th percentile. I have argued 17 cases before federal courts, winning 14. I have never plagiarized, never paid someone to write my work, never claimed achievements I didn't earn. My legal education may not have come from an Ivy League institution, but every word I wrote, every exam I took, every achievement I earned was actually mine. The contrast could not have been more stark. On one side sat Hawley, exposed as an academic fraud who had built his entire career on deception and privilege. On the other sat Crockett, whose achievements, while from a less prestigious institution, were genuine, earned through actual work and intellect. The committee room had become completely silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what had been revealed. Senator Hawley, Crockett continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, you asked if Houston was even ranked in the top 100 law schools. Let me tell you what Houston taught me that Yale apparently failed to teach you. It taught me that integrity matters more than prestige. It taught me that the law is about justice, not connections. It taught me that real excellence comes from actual achievement, not purchased credentials. And most importantly, it taught me that using privilege to mock those who earned their achievements honestly is the mark of someone who knows, deep down, that they're an imposter. She pulled out one final document, this one appearing to be fresh, dated just days before the hearing. This is a letter from Yale Law School's current dean, delivered to my office yesterday after they completed their own internal review based on the evidence we provided. They are initiating proceedings to revoke your law degree based on academic fraud. Stanford is conducting a similar review of your undergraduate degree. The Missouri Bar has announced an investigation into whether you obtained your law license through fraudulent means. Your entire academic and professional foundation is crumbling, Senator Hawley, and you chose this moment to mock my education? The hearing room erupted. Committee members were shouting over each other, demanding explanations, calling for investigations, some calling for Hawley's immediate resignation. The gallery was in chaos as reporters rushed to file their stories. The hashtag #Hawley fraud was already trending on social media before the hearing had even recessed. Conservative commentators who had praised Hawley as their intellectual champion were scrambling to distance themselves. Liberal commentators were having difficulty containing their satisfaction at seeing the sanctimonious senator exposed as a complete fraud. Hawley's response was perhaps the most telling indication of his guilt. Instead of mounting a vigorous defense, instead of providing counter-evidence, he simply sat in stunned silence, his face cycling through expressions of shock, anger, fear, and finally, resignation. When the committee chair asked if he had any response to the allegations, Hawley's attorney stood and announced that the senator would be invoking his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, an admission that spoke louder than any confession could have. The immediate aftermath of the hearing was extraordinary. Within hours, Yale Law School confirmed they were investigating the revocation of Hawley's degree. Stanford University announced a similar investigation. The University of Missouri placed Hawley's former position under review and announced they would seek to recover salary paid based on fraudulent credentials. The Missouri Bar Association announced an emergency review of Hawley's license to practice law. The Supreme Court announced they were reviewing the validity of all clerkships that may have been obtained through false credentials, potentially calling into question every decision Hawley had worked on during his time there. The political consequences were equally swift and devastating. Republican senators who had been Hawley's allies immediately distanced themselves. Senator Ted Cruz, who had often appeared with Hawley as part of the intellectual conservative wing of the party, claimed he had always suspected something was off about Hawley's academic record. Senator Tom Cotton announced he would no longer co-sponsor any legislation with Hawley. The Republican Study Committee removed Hawley from all leadership positions. There were immediate calls for his resignation from the Senate, with even some Republicans suggesting he had lost all credibility to serve. The criminal investigation that followed revealed even more damaging information. Federal prosecutors discovered that Hawley had claimed his fraudulent academic credentials on federal forms, including his Senate financial disclosures and his application for security clearances. Each false statement was a potential felony. The total amount of money he had obtained through fraud, including salary, book advances, speaking fees, and board positions, exceeded $10 million. Prosecutors began building cases for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges related to the academic fraud ring he had operated at Yale. The investigation also revealed a network of other politicians and judges who had benefited from similar academic fraud schemes at elite universities. Hawley's exposure had opened a Pandora's box that would eventually lead to dozens of investigations into fraudulent credentials among the political and judicial elite. Several federal judges quietly announced their retirements rather than face scrutiny of their academic records. At least 3 other senators were discovered to have inflated or fabricated portions of their academic achievements. For Josh Hawley himself, the collapse was complete and irreversible. His book publisher canceled his contract and demanded return of his advance. His speaking agency dropped him as a client. The various boards and organizations he served on removed him immediately. His political action committee saw donations dry up overnight. His staff began resigning en masse, not wanting to be associated with a fraud. Within a week of the hearing, Hawley had gone from being a rising star in conservative politics to a pariah whose very name had become synonymous with academic fraud and intellectual dishonesty. The cultural impact extended far beyond politics. The exposure of Hawley's fraud sparked a national conversation about educational elitism and the way Ivy League credentials were used to gatekeep positions of power. Universities across the country began implementing more stringent verification processes for academic work. The practice of wealthy students purchasing academic work from struggling students was exposed as widespread, leading to reforms in how universities monitor and prevent academic dishonesty. Law schools in particular underwent significant changes. The American Bar Association announced new requirements for verifying the authenticity of academic credentials for bar admission. Law reviews implemented plagiarism detection software and began requiring signed affidavits that submitted work was original. The culture of educational elitism that had allowed someone like Hawley to weaponize fraudulent credentials while mocking legitimate achievements from less prestigious schools faced a long overdue reckoning. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation with Hawley elevated her to national prominence, not just as a skilled legislator, but as a defender of educational integrity and meritocracy. Her calm, methodical destruction of Hawley, using documented evidence while defending the value of public education, resonated with millions of Americans who had worked hard for their achievements, only to be dismissed by those with elite credentials. The moment when she revealed the folder marked Hawley, academic fraud, became one of the most iconic images in American political history. The broader implications for American politics were transformative. The exposure of Hawley's fraud led to new requirements for all federal candidates to provide verified academic transcripts. The practice of using educational credentials as weapons in political debate became much more dangerous when anyone could be asked to prove their achievements were real. The assumption that graduation from an elite institution automatically meant superiority was shattered by the revelation that some of the most prestigious degrees had been bought rather than earned. 6 months after the hearing, Josh Hawley was indicted on 17 federal counts related to fraud, conspiracy, and false statements. The trial revealed even more damaging information about the extent of his academic dishonesty and the financial benefits he had derived from it. Former classmates testified about the essay mill he had run at Yale. Professors testified about the pressure they had faced to pass him, despite his lack of actual achievement. Financial experts calculated the total fraud at over $15 million when all sources of income based on false credentials were included. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Hawley was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for all money obtained through fraud. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted that Hawley had corrupted not just his own achievements, but had facilitated the corruption of others, undermining the integrity of American educational and legal institutions. The sentence was intended to send a message that academic fraud, especially when used to obtain positions of public trust, would be treated as seriously as any other form of fraud. Yale Law School and Stanford University both formally revoked Hawley's degrees, marking the first time in either institution's history that they had taken such action against a sitting senator. The Missouri Bar Association permanently disbarred him, ensuring he could never practice law again even after serving his sentence. His name was removed from all honors and positions he had held based on his fraudulent credentials. The Josh Hawley who had mocked Jasmine Crockett's education ceased to exist in any professional capacity, replaced by a cautionary tale about the dangers of building a career on lies. The transformation of how Americans viewed educational credentials was perhaps the most lasting impact of the scandal. Public universities saw increased applications, as students recognized that genuine achievement mattered more than institutional prestige. Employers began focusing more on actual capabilities rather than where degrees were earned. The automatic deference given to Ivy League graduates in politics and law was replaced by a more skeptical evaluation of what those credentials actually represented. If this exposure of one of the biggest academic fraud scandals in American political history has shown you the importance of genuine achievement over purchased prestige, and the danger of mocking others' education when your own credentials are fraudulent, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we'll continue investigating the real qualifications of those who claim superiority based on where they went to school, rather than what they actually learned and achieved.